Welcome to Abiding Creatives Podcast, where we talk about art, faith, and caring for your creative soul. I'm Haley, an artist and writer learning to faithfully follow Jesus in my creative calling. And this is the podcast for all of us makers, dreamers, and ones created to create, who are ready to let go of striving and discover the joy and freedom of creating with Jesus. Welcome back to Abiding Creatives Podcast. Today, I'm going to be sharing the creative prompt I've picked for March. And this is part of a little series that we're doing through Substack where I'm offering a creative prompt every month that's inspired by what the Lord's been teaching me and scripture and just spiritual topics that we can explore through our creativity. And my hope is that it inspires us to create with Jesus, but also build community as we're talking about the deeper things of this world and creativity. So if you want to participate, make sure that you are subscribed to Abiding Creatives on Substack and be on the lookout at the beginning of each month when I'll be releasing an episode specifically about this creative prompt that I sense the Lord wanting us to lean into. Then take some time after you've listened to ponder the questions and reflections that I'm going to offer through this episode and see if God is putting anything on your heart to create or write about. And then take some time this month to lean into it and create with him, and maybe even consider collaborating with another person on Substack. My hope is that this helps us learn to create with Jesus from abiding and build meaningful friendships on this platform. And if you create something that you want to share, make sure that you tag Abiding Creatives, and also feel free to DM me if you want your piece to be featured on a future episode. I really want to start sharing what you're creating and promote other amazing faithful creatives through this podcast. Now, before we get into the episode, I want to invite you to like, share, and leave a comment on this podcast. It would mean so much to me if you could help me keep sharing this podcast with all the creatives who need to hear it. And also, make sure you listen through the whole episode because at the end, I'm going to share a poem that I wrote inspired by February's creative prompt, so you're not going to want to miss that. Now let's dive in. So the prompt for March is creative endurance. I'm curious to know how you keep creating when it feels like nothing's going right, you just feel discouraged and don't know what to do next. This is something that I know I've wrestled with, and I know I'm not the only one who struggles with this on the creative path. And as followers of Jesus, we're called not to grow weary in doing good, and I think that extends to the good creative work that he calls us into. That's a lot easier said than done. And I believe there comes a time in any worthy pursuit where we start to question if we should keep going. I'm finding that knowing if and when to quit is an art form in itself. And there are some times that it's very clear that the right thing to do is to quit, like when an environment or a relationship is really toxic and harmful to you and others. But then there are times that you don't want to quit too soon, like a line at Disneyland for Space Mountain or in the middle of a slow burn episode of Severance. At least I wouldn't do that if I were you. But then there's everything in between. And those are the times when the usual playbook just isn't working out for you and it seems your efforts aren't matching your outcomes. And I find these are the times when I start to question, what am I doing wrong? You know those times that you hear a quote and it just immediately hits you? That's how I felt when I first heard Rita Mae Brown's famous quote, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results." Apparently, this quote has been attributed to Einstein for many years, but it's actually from Brown's book, Sudden Death in 1983. Anyway, I first heard this quote while I was in college. I was a junior and I was struggling to discern whether I should stay in this student leadership position at this Christian club that I was part of, or if God was okay with me quitting. I was feeling so much burnout from the ways that things were run and the expectations that were being placed on me. But I also felt guilty in some way, like I wasn't stewarding the responsibility well enough. And I think this sense of spiritual manipulation or guilt can be a big factor that keeps us from quitting, even when we sense the Spirit saying it's okay to let go. But Brown's quote was this light bulb moment for me because I realized I was going to stay miserable and build resentment if I remained in this position and nothing changed. And I sensed that no big organizational reform was going to happen anytime soon, so change was out of my control. I think this idea of reassessing our inputs, what we can control, and also how that impacts our outputs is a really good guide for a lot of areas of our life, but I'm also finding that there's times when this advice can only take us so far. I'm starting to believe there's this kind of insanity that we as creatives toe the line of in pursuing our God-given creative calling. No matter how talented and disciplined we are, we're not in control of our outcomes. We face often rejection and disappointment as much, if not even more, as success and achievement. And so we often run into moments where we're doing all the right things, but nothing is going the way that we want it to. And it's in those times that we have to find something deeper that compels us to keep creating, even when there's no success in sight. Time and again, I've found this to be true as I've said yes to embracing my creative identity and sharing my art with the world. I never would have predicted back in 2020 when I started sharing my art where I would be now and the endurance it would take to keep going. I've shared bits of my story here on the podcast, but to recap, in 2020, I found myself in a spiritual wilderness for the first time, and it really shook up the ideas and beliefs that I had about myself, my purpose, and where God was in all of it. And I started to paint to process that, and these paintings of deserts, I felt compelled to start sharing on Instagram and to inspire other people who may be going through similar experiences. I had such big expectations that God was going to grow my platform and use my art for his grand purposes in a very short amount of time. And let's just say that that didn't happen the way I thought, and it led to a lot of disappointment. It was so hard to see other creatives, especially faithful creatives, get what I wanted and wonder why it wasn't happening for me. And in some ways, it led to a crisis of faith where I realized that the things that I was believing about God were very different from the realities that I was facing. It took a lot of lamenting and unraveling to finally start to understand God's heart and my creative purpose. I started to see how the endless scroll of success that I saw on my phone was molding my expectations and reasons for creating. I was so focused on specific outcomes that just weren't happening for me at the moment. I knew if I kept fixating on these external metrics of growth, I'd quickly give up on my creative calling. Perhaps you've been here too, whether it's with your creative work or another area of your life. It really hurts to feel like your efforts and your prayers go unseen. And if you're not careful, you may start to believe that if the path is slow and challenging, God must not be in it. We live in a world obsessed with instant growth and immediate results. If the first try is a flop, we assume that something went wrong or we're on the wrong path and it's not worth continuing. And somewhere along the way, it seems we've equated this pattern of expansion and progress to be the clearest sign that God is moving. He certainly still does miracles today, but if you look at Jesus' experience on earth, even the moments of supernatural power were punctuation marks between strings of ordinary and often painful life. Yet he knew there was purpose in it all, so he continued. I'm so grateful that Jesus modeled this path, especially for us faithful creatives who often question if the art we're making really matters and if God called us to create in the first place. Because let's be honest, it takes faith to keep going when the reality in front of you is the opposite of what you're hoping for. You may be called crazy or you feel like you're going insane. You might even get the urge to abandon your craft or divert down a different road. My church has been exploring the book of Hebrews in the beginning of 2026, and there are a couple iconic verses that I've been returning to throughout the last few weeks. They're Hebrews 12, 1-2 that say, "Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he's seated in the place of honor beside God's throne." Right before these verses, the author walks us through the hall of faith of men and women who held on to the promises of God, even the ones that they didn't see in their lifetime. And what encourages me is they were not perfect. They made mistakes, they felt misunderstood, and they probably faced moments of deep disappointment and discouragement. They didn't fully know how God would fulfill these promises, and they had to put their trust in Him and His character instead of outcomes. These days when I get discouraged, I try to remember the company of faithful creatives who have paved the path before me. Perhaps they too had to endure dark seasons and creating in the unknown. They had to rely on a source of creativity and hope that was beyond themselves. I mean, what else would compel someone to write thousands of words that no one would ever read, or paint hundreds of paintings just to put them in a drawer? Sure, some of this was purely practice and a necessity to master their craft, but I believe there was a deeper calling that was keeping them going, and it was the Spirit of God that was empowering them to keep creating even when they didn't know where it would take them. As we head into March, I sense the same Spirit whispering to us to endure in our creative work, to paint, sing, dance, sculpt, no matter who sees it and what success it brings us, to trust in God's faithfulness and goodness in all seasons. And when we're feeling low and weary, to cry out to the one who cultivates our faith till the end. Saying yes to your creative calling means embracing all the highs and lows that come with it. And it's my prayer that we hold on to hope that creating with the Creator is worth it. So if this idea of creative endurance is something that God has taught you in the recent seasons, or it's something that you really need to hold on to right now, I want to encourage you to take some time this month to write or make some art that's inspired by this prompt. I'll leave you with a few reflection questions to help you get started. What thoughts and feelings arise with the idea of creative endurance? What experiences, truth, and wisdom do you rely on to keep creating in the midst of disappointment? How has Jesus met you when you felt faithless in your creative work? How might He want to meet you right now? So set aside some time to ponder these questions with the Lord and ask Him to reveal something that He wants you to create inspired by creative endurance. Maybe even bring another creative along and collaborate together, and make sure to tag Abiding Creatives on Substack to share the work with everyone and possibly even have it on next episode. Now, before we go, I promised I would share a poem I wrote inspired by February's prompt, which was frozen in February but longing for spring. This is called Planted Deep. It seems I'm stuck again in soil, unseen, and shaking fists full of snow that numb my hands and turn my heart bitter. Unwanted winter, my path to happiness and ease and pleasure obstructed by this blizzard. Each day I pray for a shovel, but instead you sit beside me with patient eyes, unafraid of the passing time. Yet I can't help but wonder, don't you want better for me? Can't you see I'm frozen in February, but longing for spring? You say the seed must fall before it becomes a tree, that in the dirt and desolation you'll meet me, to draw my roots into your love and nourish my restless soul, until I bloom with fruit, the kind only grown when planted deep. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. I'm so excited to see what you created for the February prompt and also what you're going to create for this theme of creative endurance. So let me know what you think of this prompt and any questions you have in the comments, and I look forward to continuing the conversation on the next episode.